You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Today we welcome Wendy Ewald to the program. Wendy is a photographer, a documentarian, a conceptual artist, and an educator. She's the winner of countless awards, Guggenheim and MacArthur Fellowships to name two. She's exhibited and published extensively and was recently profiled in an episode of the PBS program POV, and it's worth a watch. However, she might be best described as a collaborator, and that's a great thing to be called. For 40 years, she's created photo projects with women, families, teachers, and most notably, children. In locations throughout the world, she's led documentary investigations and collaborative projects which encourage the participants to use cameras to examine their own lives, families, communities, and to make images of their fantasies and dreams. And the photos that Wendy created during these projects are also part of the process. Her subjects altered pictures that she took, which in a sense made them co-authors of their stories, questioning the very definition of authorship. Today, we're going to talk with Wendy about her photography work in general, but focus on her landmark book, Portraits and Dreams, Photographs and Stories by Children of the Appalachians, which was published in 1985 and emerged from a 6-year project working with kids in rural Kentucky. The book was recently reissued and expanded into a second publication with contemporary pictures and stories by 8 of the students from the original publication. It adds a whole new dimension to her original story. The new book is available from Mac Books, and now it's a pleasure to welcome Wendy Ewald to the show. Wendy, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. And before we begin, I just want to say I watched that PBS documentary last night, and I was truly touched by it. It's an amazing, amazing piece of work. Welcome so much. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Alan. Great to be here, too.
And as I said, I watched the documentary last night, and I was totally taken by it. Let's start talking about photography. What is photography to you? How would you define photography now? And how would you have defined it when you first picked up a camera? And we'd like to know when you did that. And when you first caught the bug as a photographer.
I started pretty early on. I guess it was when I was in high school. I had a fantastic teacher, Wendy McNeil, who was also a terrific photographer. And she had a 4x5 Graflex. And so that was really my first camera.
You are a true photographer.
Yeah. Yeah. And to see those images, as sharp as they were, was just thrilling to me. So I really did. I went from that. Then at the same time, the summer of my graduation from high school, after I started working with kids and Polaroid cameras. So I was doing 4x5 and Polaroid swingers at the same time.
Sure.
So you started.
I have a question for you. I know that back in that day, Polaroid and other companies in the photo industry were very proactive about supplying materials, cameras and film specifically, to teachers for projects like this. And I know Polaroid was pretty active. Were they contributing a product to you, cameras and film?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I wrote my first grant proposal when I was in high school to them. Wow. And they gave me 10 cameras and 100 film packs. And I went to work that summer in Labrador in an Innu community. And it was terrific. I mean, from the get-go, I saw that they could make these pictures that I couldn't make, both in composition and subject matter. So that really started me off. Polaroid has been incredible support over the years, incredible support.
Were there any other companies, recognizable name companies, also backing you up?
Oh yeah, that's true. There were over the years. There's been a lot of sponsorship. There was a lot of sponsorship. Of course, now that's not so easy because we don't have all that stuff now.
Yeah.
it's
And were you
cheaper.
using Polaroid at the beginning because the immediacy of the image, and you could talk to the kids right about it right afterwards? Was that part of the process, or how did
Yes,
that
yes, no, of course it was. I mean, I was using it because they gave it to me, you know, but and but it was easy to see the images, and also they could, you know, I was working in places where there wouldn't have been any darkroom,
right?
and so that they could, you know, make, you know, photo essays with the prints, and booklets and things like that. So, and they use writing as well as photographs. So, yeah, it was incredibly valuable. Plus, you know, they didn't have any pictures of themselves,
Right.
so it meant quite a lot.
And can I ask, I mean, here you are 18, more or less, and you were immediately taking the cameras and giving them to other people and trying to find your photography through others. How did you get to it so early? And how did that, I mean, were you also involved in education outside of photography? Or?
Well, I wasn't at that point, but I had worked in Detroit, and it was the summer after the uprising. And it wasn't, you know, photography as a creative medium, but I was with 6 other teachers, you know, real teachers. I was teaching Black history, which is crazy. But there was this team of us who were doing it in a special program. It's kind of like a freedom school in Detroit. And I took it on myself to make visual records of what I could find of what we were teaching, and make visual tools for the course we were teaching. And this was even before like Xerox or anything like that. So, you know, I had to photograph everything that we were using. And, you know, so I was in this incredible world, you know, with Betty Chavez and many civil rights leaders. And, you know, it was pretty clear to me that this was incredibly interesting. And that's where I wanted to go with my life, to see, you know, where change was happening. So it was kind of, then I found out about this program in Canada, in northern Canada, to work with young people. And fortunately, I was placed in this community, in this Native Canadian community, and at a point where they were in this big transition to being sedentary from being a migratory people. So, you know, what else? I mean, going back to, you know, what was around me wasn't that interesting until much, much later.
You mentioned places in transition. First of all, I have a question of how did you end up in Kentucky, in the most remote locale of Kentucky? And you mentioned places in transition. And from what I gathered, when you were originally back there 35 years ago or so, whenever it was still the coal industry. Coal was king, and everybody was working there. And that was essentially the economic pipeline there. And then when you go back, coal was gone, and people's lives had drastically changed. And again, you reconnected with 8 people, several of whom did well, and several who obviously did not do as well and had a lot of issues. So what kind of transition was going on? First of all, how did you end up there, and how did you define place in transition then in Kentucky?
Well, I ended up in Kentucky working with an incredible organization called Apple Shop that still exists, which was originally called the Appalachian Media Workshop. That was a part of the Office of Economic Opportunity, the War on Poverty. During the War on Poverty, they created 12 filmmaking cooperatives. The government did across the country, with the idea of, one, to change Hollywood, thinking that they would, train these kids to become filmmakers, and then they'd go off to Hollywood and, be able to make films that were quite different, and also to give them an economic, leg up by becoming filmmakers. And of course, this was a dream, a 60s dream, right? That never really sort of materialized in the way that they thought it would. But the people in Kentucky, in their community, they decided they didn't want to go to Hollywood. They wanted to raise their own money and make their own films and live where they were living. And they're still doing it today. And Portraits and Dreams, the film you mentioned, is an Apple Shop film. I mean, it comes from that organization.
Okay.
I remember actually back in college applying for an internship there, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah. It didn't happen, but I do remember it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but look where you are now.
Right. There you go. All worked out. But were there any models that you were following when, back then when we think of this idea of community photography and going into neighborhoods or communities that are underserved? It is something that is relatively common now. Did you have people that you were looking to for advice or other programs that you were following when you were doing this outside of Apple Shop?
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, I had seen when I graduated from high school, I was given a photography prize, which was a book of photographs. There were a couple of books that were out at that time, and one was photographs in prison, and I can't remember what it was called. And then there was a book called Image is You, and I think that's what I was given as a prize. And they were photographs taken by young people, but which I thought was really interesting. But I didn't understand why the pictures weren't, what they could be. And so I guess I found as soon as I started working with kids that the pictures they made were incredible. And I don't know whether it was, the
bad editing,
bad editing, or
right.
or also that I was a natural teacher, and was able to sort of pick out things that we could think about and talk about and work on.
Well,
I guess
the pictures in the documentary, I mean, you look like a kid standing next to those kids. I mean,
yeah.
it seems like you were their same age, and by some of the descriptions, you must have been able to kind of bridge a gap between the adult world for them to share some of the, their thoughts and their dreams with you. So, the credit to your teaching ability. Needless to say.
You also bridged the two different things. You're the teacher, this authoritarian human being who gives you someone knowledge. But you also spent your off hours with these people, weekends and times, and you're talking about just I forget which of the students it was you went back to, that you're just laying there in bed talking about dreams that she had, and she's explaining things to you. And teachers normally don't go that far. They try to build a wall, and they say it's recommended, but you actually did not have walls, it seems. And I'd say something that really struck me about this is that more than one of these students who you went back to said that you opened up a part of the world that they did not know from, because this is such an insular, remote place. They don't really have contact with the outside world. And back then there was no internet, and none of them had probably TV, let alone running water or electricity. Yet there's this creative spark, and there's this curiosity, and there's this other reality that these kids have, that regardless of the fact that they had no money, and even though they understood that they were, the lower class, they had so much going for them and so many treasures around them that they knew how to use. And it amazed me that these kids were able to reach down and with these simple cameras, really able to communicate and take photographs that were really remain quite outstanding. Did you expect that kind of a return from these kids? And also, how does this vary from place to place, because not only Kentucky, you've parachuted into like Colombia, India, London, Israel, all over the place, and you've done similar things in other cultures. Is this all parallel? Do you know differences?
Mm-hmm.
I just asked you 8 questions.
Yeah.
Answer anyone you want.
Well, they're all different. All the places are different. But when I started with those kids in Kentucky, no, I didn't know they were going to do that. And second of all, people couldn't read those pictures. I think we can read them now, because of things that have happened, or because of a visual sophistication maybe that we have now that we didn't then. Like I went to Aperture to try and get the book published. I mean, I called them up and said, I've got these pictures and this book, and can I come in and show you what I'm up to? And they said, no, we don't do that kind of thing. And, so we've advanced from that time.
Certainly.
But I could, for some reason, I just, couldn't believe these pictures that were coming out. And as you said, I was seeing them develop, the kids develop, and seeing their vision develop, and getting to know them so well. I could read the pictures and I could edit them better than, probably anybody else could have at that time.
And at the time, how much of your thought process was about making them better photographers, quote unquote? Were you vested at that point in upping their technical game, or was it really more about finding ways that they could express?
Both of those things. I thought it was incredibly important that they know how to use the technology, and no reason why they couldn't learn to use it as well as anyone. I mean, they were using, simple cameras, but those simple cameras had +X film. They were able to, they developed their film and they printed their pictures, so that they understood, the process. And then, I taught them how to use the camera very, very slowly and carefully. And I taught people how to use different kinds of cameras, for a long time. And, the idea was that they be in control of their vision. Right. And they were up to that challenge.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. Again, in the documentary points us out the relationship to photography in the homes. And I don't know how this is paralleled around the world, but certainly family photos going back generations, kids' school photos, snapshots were all over the walls of the homes of these kids. So I guess it's all about this idea of how do you appreciate an image? I mean, whether it's of you or then here you go, you're taking it. And so is there anything, I don't know if that's a question or not necessarily, but
I was aware of that.
Right.
And also aware, because I spent 4 or 5 years with them.
Right.
So, there was time to develop that. But also, I wanted them to understand. I mean, I think a lot of times when maybe kids are taking pictures of things, that they think the picture communicates something because of what the picture is of. Mm-hmm. And I wanted them to understand how to use the medium to show what they felt and what they wanted the viewer to feel about that subject. So, we had various exercises that we did so that they could learn how to communicate with each other about that, and how, this picture of your Uncle Joey, he doesn't look like this wonderful person you think he does in this picture. And why? But it's them talking to each other, and me facilitating that. So I think that makes it, I don't know, it was a working process. just not only in looking at pictures, but also in responding to pictures.
How long did it take you to get to a point where this started to happen? Because obviously the beginning of it was all technical, how does a camera work? How do you develop film? And they were excited about developing film and watching all the stuff coming up. At what point did you transition from the technical how-to process to the, what are we going to do with this now? And how do we talk through our cameras? And at what point did you say, okay, they got it, they're doing it?
Well,
and I'm sure it was not overnight, but I mean, was it a matter of weeks or months after starting? Because again, you did this over a course of 4 or 5 years. At what point did you say, okay, this is what I wanted to do? They're doing it.
Well, I think there's two things. One is you understand when you see these fantastic pictures, you think, oh, that's what I wanted to do. And then you take it to another level, which is, what are we going to do with it now?
Right.
And at a certain point, I don't know when we had exhibitions. Like we had an exhibition at ICP. Their show was in the basement, and there was a big Japanese photography show, upstairs. And Ben Lifson in the Village Voice wrote a page review comparing Portraits and Dreams to the Japanese show, and saying that Portraits and Dreams was a much better exhibition than the Japanese.
You can say it loud. It's all right. It's all right.
And then the kids came there to New York, and they were on stage and at ICP, and talking about what they had done. And I remember Cornell Kappa walking out of the room, shaking his head, going, "Incredible, incredible."
That's great.
That's
because they were able to talk about what they did. It was conscious.
While you're also teaching and the kids are photographing, you're photographing also. And this idea is kind of hard to get my head around a bit because of the time and effort and thought process it takes to create your own work. How were you able to kind of, wear two hats at this time? Was it easy, or did you pick up the camera? Did you have to at times say, you know what, this is my time to shoot?
Yeah, well, that was a kind of interesting process over time. The shooting I was doing was sort of documentary shooting with the 4x5. And then, then having classes with kids, it could have been out in the community or, different, or in schools or whatever. Then with time, I began thinking about what is the difference between those two things? What is the difference between me as a interpreter or shooter and then me as an interpreter with them of their pictures and a teacher and conceptual thinker about how to look at this, and then I thought, well, really, I'm an educator and a photographer or artist, and if I'm an educator, I can I can also be an artist as an educator, and I can be a photographer and be an educator. So then I started looking for other ways to sort of put them together, and that's when I would shoot something and have kids alter the negative, or I would shoot something and they would write, or they would shoot something and I would write.
And was that hard? Was that initially hard to do that, to kind of give your work over to people and let them do with it as they wanted, or not really? I mean, once you came to that realization, it was easy.
Well, in the beginning, I think that I got very interested in the graphic nature of text. And also transferring that to a negative. So that the first time that I had kids work on a negative, was scratching, their name into the negative as a kind of monument or
right.
a memorial,
A tag. Yeah.
and then sort of went from there.
And back when you were shooting, would you also show your photos to the kids? Like, did you have crit sessions where they would show their images and you would talk, but then you would also share yours, or was that something you kept a bit private?
No, I would show, well, as long as I didn't have to develop them. If I was shooting Polaroid, I would give them the pictures. And in India, for example, when I started working with them, they really didn't understand what a photograph was. And the word in Gujarat was phota, which was an engraved image. So that I needed to show them right away what a photograph was. So I took a picture with the Polaroid, positive negative film, so they could see that picture of themselves, and they could see the negative. So it kind of fast forwarded things, because up until that point, they really thought that the photographs, that they could make photographs of the gods, because that word phota was also an engraved image of the gods.
Huh.
So it's really
for example, how
interesting.
did you find the place you went in India? How did that come about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I always work with organizations that are doing work that I admire, and in the places I go. And in India, I worked with the Self-Employed Women's Association, which was a union of home-based workers, like rag pickers or cigarette rollers, and so they arranged for me to live and work in a village outside of Ahmedabad, which was a big town there. So we actually built a darkroom out of mud and cement, and it was in the front yard of the barber, and the barber's daughter worked with me, and it was amazing experience.
So you often need to find an organization then to kind of be the entryway in, or at least the structure around to have wow.
And then also the idea is that then they can continue the project in the future. Gotcha. So I leave the equipment with them.
Right. This actually leads me to a question I wanted to ask about this idea of community photography, and at the heart of it is knowing the community and being a part of the community, and then showing the rest of the world theoretically what your community is. And it takes time, and I guess a big issue with photography is that, people come in, they take their photos, great photos or otherwise, and then they leave, which is, you can't stay everywhere, I suppose. And you addressed that a little bit in the film when you talked about this idea of guilt. How did you wrestle with that over the years, and how is it possible to create a community when you know that you're going to be leaving eventually?
Well, yeah, that's really hard. I mean, that whole process has been hard for me. I mean, because it's a question of seeing too, not just creating a community, but me understanding what I'm seeing. Often, like I was in India for 7 months. In the beginning, I was very doubtful about whether I was able to see this community and create this community. But there are always times in this process where at a certain point, I think, oh yeah, okay, I see what's happening now. This is okay. And they really are expressing themselves in a way that's important. But there's so much self-doubt. I mean, it's like any photographer, when you're shooting and you don't know what exactly you're getting. I mean, you do, but you don't.
Yeah.
And And in this process, it's a little bit more removed from me. So it's a little bit harder to read. And then, then at a certain point, maybe 3/4 of the way through the project, I go, oh gosh, now I understand. This is incredibly important that this is the way these things look.
Right. It takes some faith, though. It takes, experience to know that it's worked in the past, and faith.
Now it's much better, but it was very painful a lot of times earlier on.
But have there been times where it just didn't work, where you were at a community, you were at a place, you were working, and you just found that for whatever reason, either it fell apart, or you didn't feel like you got to the place you wanted to go to?
Yeah. I mean, there have been different times in different places in different ways, but in Morocco was an interesting experience. I felt like I totally failed because first of all, I thought that the kids would be able to photograph their families, because I thought, okay, that's intimate. I won't be putting them in a place they don't need to be. But that was incredibly difficult. And then when it came to asking them to photograph their community, I said, are you sure you want to do this? Here's some ideas. Here we can think about how to do this safely for you, et cetera. And they came back with blurry pictures, positive, negative, so it's not that easy to, use, but they knew how to do it. And then when I started asking them, well, why are these blurry? You know how to do this? And they started telling me the stories of going out on the street and trying to photograph people, or maybe the market or something like that. And, people were freaked out, and some of them told me about people throwing stones at them. And so, I, felt terrible, but, on the other hand, they were saying, oh, we don't care. This was fun. We wanted to do this.
Right.
So you just don't know. Yeah. But it is, yeah. And then I recorded them talking about the experience. And I do these recordings, in other languages, and then later on would translate. They have them translated. So I, got to know what was going on.
Right. Well, you find another angle to work the story, I guess. Yeah. We talk a little bit about funding, because I imagine you must be spending a lot of time raising money, or at least you used to anyway. I mean, is grant writing, a big part of your time?
Yeah, it really used to be. I mean, fortunately now I usually get commissions or something like that. But yeah, well, no, I'm writing one now.
Okay.
But
But by the way, being on this podcast is going to lend a whole new realm of credibility to all of your efforts. I just want you to know that.
Thank you.
Put it on the resume.
I'll need it.
And you could mention our names anytime you want to drop our names. Feel free, okay?
Well, in addition to organizations and foundations, have you tried, working with manufacturers and private companies to get grants and get money this way?
Well, I did in the beginning.
Yeah.
That was really, especially all the equipment and stuff that I needed. And now I haven't done that so much. I mean, largely because I don't know where I am in terms of, digital, or not, large format digital, all these things. So, I had this way of working like we all did for many years, and then that changed, and I still don't feel I'm totally settled in that, in the change, although I have used all those new technologies.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and we come back. We're going to be speaking more with Wendy Ewald and Portraits and Dreams, Photographs and Stories by Children of Appalachians. Stay tuned.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes in your podcast app or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website and join the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
Okay, we are back. Wendy, a question we want to ask with our second part of the show is, you did this whole project 30-something years ago, and then you went back, and you got together with 8 of your former students and compared notes. And that, to me, makes the story even so much more powerful, especially after watching the documentary and seeing how it all unfolds. When did you start thinking about that, and what got you to go back, or what are the seeds of part 2?
Well, I was always thinking about the students, and sometimes, I had seen a couple of them because I did go back to Kentucky to visit friends. But then in, I don't know, maybe about 2010 or something like that, I got the first email from one of the students, Sue Dixon, now Brashears, who had become a teacher and
Right.
And also was a high school principal. And she had gone to a workshop on poverty and education. And she got very uncomfortable at the workshop and didn't really understand what they were talking about. She did more than they did. And then she said when she got home, she took out our book, Portraits and Dreams, and looked at it. And she realized that that was what the person who was leading the workshop was talking about. She was talking about Sue, and she was talking about the other students and how they were poor and how they needed to be dealt with as students because they were poor. And she said by the time she finished looking at the book, she was sobbing. And she realized that they didn't see themselves as poor. They saw themselves as having a, rich life. And, maybe they didn't have as much stuff as the other kids maybe at that time did. But so she really wanted to explore this idea of poverty and how people had seen the pictures. And then I got another, email from Willie, who remembered exactly what was going on when he took the pictures he took, what was going on outside the frame, inside the frame, etc. So I realized, wow, there's a lot going on there. And then I think people at the Apple Shop were interested in that idea too, that we see what people are like now and what they think of what they did then. And my best friend from the time, Elizabeth Barrett, she said, "Okay, let's make a film." And I said, "Oh, I don't know about that. Maybe we'll make an installation or something." But she said, "No, let's make a film." And so we embarked on this idea of us co-directing a film about the kids that we could find. And we had a reunion of like maybe, I don't know, about 40 kids, and then started filming over the years.
But one of the things that really came to me is that they really seem to be, still to this day, have very heavy impressions of the experience of working with you all those years ago and taking the pictures and expressing themselves through photographs. And I don't think it's because you were there again with a film crew, which obviously could make you, come out with even more stuff and you sort of build up on more than it is. But I really felt that in their hearts, they're really talking, this was a significant thing in their life that has stayed with them and maybe even helped carry them to where they are now.
Yeah, well, I think that when we first met each other, like one of the kids, Russell and I first met each other, instantly there was this kind of, and I had forgotten it, this kind of humorous flirtation that went on with us when he was a kid. And now here it was again. So, there was something that was still there, that had been there at the time. And that made it, I think easier for all of us to go back and talk about what we remembered. There were some things that I had no idea about at the time that I found out, through our reconnection. Like Gary, for example, who was the smartest kid I think I've probably ever worked with, in all kinds of ways. And, he brought in a picture to the reunion of him and his father and a cat and a pickaxe, and wanted all of us to see that was the picture taken by an abused child himself, to try to please his abuser, his father. So, there were many things that all of us learned about each other.
I just found him to be a fascinating human being. I mean, considering what he came from, he's developed very far. And one thing, a little takeaway I have is that you cannot judge what people can be based on where they're from. He seemed to have a very good grasp on a global thing about humanity and what it's like to be a person and what counts. And again, he seems to go back a lot to what you brought to them. And he said, you opened us up. And then he asks you, and a few people did we affect you? And I thought that was wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that was great. And I guess my answer, which I would still say the same today, is that I did really fall in love with him in a way that you fall in love for the first time. And
yes,
that's
great comparison. I love when you brought that up.
Yeah, it's taken me to where I am now, obviously. But I also think about these kids is they were who they were when I met them, who they are now when I met them. They've done a lot and moved a lot, but they were incredible people at that time. And I sometimes think that, if we had that idea about kids in general and had the opportunity to listen more than we do, that, the whole idea of education, could be more effective, or, if we just listened more.
And there's one thing we started to touch on in the first part of the show, but I want to get back to it because, at the heart of this is self-empowerment and telling your own stories through a camera. And nowadays, most kids, not all kids, have a phone and access to the internet, and they are taking pictures all the time and posting them and telling their stories and sharing them. Do you feel that that grants them more empowerment, or is there something else going on here where it's not, the quantity of photos or self-expression is not bringing that empowerment?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that maybe is slightly different that what we do or did is explore medium in a way that I remember somebody saying to me at the time, well, it sounds like a graduate seminar.
Yeah.
That they need to be in control of it all, as much as possible. So they understand that, moving the camera this way or that way, or using this color or that color. And I know that people can do that with selfies, and they're more sort of in control in that way. But they need to use it more broader than that. It's
You got to dig deeper.
yeah.
Well, I think time, and that's something that you got back to several times. Time is a big factor because you just can't create a meaningful photo, instantaneously. It takes trial and error. It takes some reflection. It may take some guidance too, but time.
It also takes talent. I mean, somebody like Denise Dixon now Benj, she right out the bat she started making these pictures with amazing compositions, very simple but very powerful in the way that she used the frame, and then she had incredible ideas, and the subjects, she knew how to work with her subjects. So, I mean, her pictures are among the best pictures ever.
And you have taught in universities, I believe, and a lot of your work is in academia. How do you balance, when you're going, this back and forth that you have to do, where you're in the field, you're working for a long time with a community or with a group of students, and then you go back to an academic setting. Is it easy? Is it the way you've kind of pictured your career to go in that sense? And what do you bring back and forth, when you go from one to the other?
Yeah, I mean, I actually didn't think that I would work in academia. It wasn't something that I planned, and but it became, of interest to people, in universities or in documentary programs. I mean, I guess it was a new way of sort of making documentaries that people were interested in. And so, I was asked to do various projects, and then eventually became, a full-time, not a full-time, but an academic, I guess, in a sense.
Sounds like
but it was, it wasn't something I planned. And of course I find it much easier to work out in the field, as probably most photographers do. But I also had a lot of experiences I could bring back. And I became very interested in the idea of collaborative work. And so, teaching in academia helped me to really explore that, and to explore how it could be done, how it could be taught in the university, not just as photography, but as other art forms as well.
So, what's the joy for you? I mean, where do you find those moments of joy? Is it when you're out there working in the field and something clicks with a student or with a kid, or is it kind of looking back and seeing these projects that have life for not just 6 or 7 years, in this case, 30 years? I mean, what really is the success to you, if you want to call it that?
Yeah, well, I think both of those things, really. I know that, I'm always surprised when I'm in the field, and no matter what I'm doing, all of a sudden, I think, this is great. And one of the projects that I've been doing now for a number of years is in Tanzania, where I've been working with the University of Dodoma, which is one of the biggest public universities in Tanzania, to create a visual learning program, and which is so different, for me, because I'm working with professors and, people getting their PhDs, but then we go out into the schools and see how these ideas that we've created work in the classrooms, and all of that is fascinating. So I think, as long as I'm exploring something, trying to figure out how this can work better, or how people are responding, or what they understand, all that discovery is really exciting for me.
Yeah. So we started a question at the very beginning, and I don't know if we got an answer, and not that I'm forcing anything on anybody, but I mean, has the definition of what is photography for you kind of changed since you started? I mean, do you think about it a lot, or is it just kind of one of those things that I'm too busy trying to explore, or do you really kind of think about it a lot? And what would you say?
Yeah, I do think it has changed a lot. I mean, I think it's much more expansive now than it was when I started. I mean, when I started, I thought I was going to go to, RISD to graduate school, and then I was at MIT with Minor White and, all that stuff. And it was interesting. And I learned a lot, but I felt it was very limiting in the end. And I wasn't interested in learning how to put my frame a la Minor White on a community.
Right.
That I thought was just, not interesting. And so I think and then as more projects I have done, I try to do them differently based on where I am, or use different materials, or try to see what's organic to that situation.
Can you give an example of that? I mean, do you are giving cameras to the students always part of the projects you do, or can you give an example of how it might change in a different location?
Well, I mean, going back to India, for example, just because we talked about it, and it was early, and it's sort of in my progression, but they were using the cameras, and they were developing and printing in very rudimentary ways. But when they were working on that process, they created their own way of doing it, and also there were some kids I had who were illiterate, so we had to do visual cues for like the developer, the stop, all that stuff, and for them to learn how to develop the film. And they related it to their own lives. So for them, agitating film, for example, was they did the motions of a ritual, and also recited, that part of the ritual, and they started making their own images by cutting up pictures that they had made, cutting up every piece of the process, like the leftover film leader, or the paper that surrounded the film, the boxes, anything they did. And, I didn't need to do any of that. The importance is like following, what makes sense to them and what excites them.
And what about this idea of memory? It really, to me, I think about, what is photography all the time, and we have our practice, and we do, and we take pictures of what we think is interesting, and then we may have a job here and there. But a lot of the folks in the movie anyway mentioned the idea of memory. And to me, I guess you can pigeonhole what photography is in different ways. But to me, it really always comes down to looking at a photo and getting that emotional response. And often it is related to memory or something. And now that you've gone back, I'm sure you were dealing with these issues at the time, but now 30 plus years later, you go back. How does memory, fit in your view of photography?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, it's such a big part. It's sort of an overwhelming question, because there's memory in the sense of remembering what's in the photograph, which often, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't the photograph become something different once that it's out in the world. And I don't really, unlike my kids in Kentucky, like Willie, they remembered everything that was going on outside of the frame. I don't have that experience. It's more like it's a story that I made at that time. The photograph is a story, and I can read that story and remember things. But I think, for some people, it's much more organic and very different. That the process means more. I guess to me, the photograph means more, and maybe with somebody like Willie, the process means more.
All right. That's the wrap of another show. Wendy, it was delightful speaking to you, especially after seeing the documentary. The work that you've done is pretty impressive. And the fact that you have this follow-up, as I said earlier, it's such a new dimension to it that's really, really wonderful. If people want to catch up on what you're doing, Instagram, websites, where can they go?
Well, I have a website that's wendyewald.com. And I am on Instagram as well.
Okay. And all of these links will be posted along with the podcast. So it's easy to get a hold of all these stuff if you missed them.
Yes. And it is being distributed going forward by PBS in the UK and Canada and US.
Yep. I was able to find it pretty easily just by Googling it. And again, I was able to watch it, and it was terrific. It was very enlightening. And it was also uplifting, I'll say as well. I mean, you can't, it's easy to get depressed looking at a lot of this, but there's so much uplifting coming out of it also, to see what people could take with such base things and build on it and actually make lives. And it's positive, and it's really, really, really good. Thank you. It was a pleasure speaking to you for the past hour plus. And I'm sure our listeners will enjoy it.
Thank you.
Okay. If you'd like to be the first on your block to be notified when a new B&H Photography podcast goes live, all you have to do is head on over to wherever you subscribe to podcasts and type B&H Photography Podcast into the search field, and you are in like Flynn. You can also find us on the B&H Explorer website and on the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group page. And for now and forever, my name is Alan Weitz, and on behalf of John Harris and Jason Tables, thank you so much for tuning in today.